Welcome to The Big Deal. I'm Tim Boyum, political anchor at Spectrum News, filling in for Errol Lewis. On this program, we bring you a weekly update of facts and analysis about the future of our country and its people. This week, the big deal is President Donald Trump's continued influence over the Republican Party. In primary elections and runoffs held across the country this week, another wave of Trump-backed candidates claimed victory in states including Alabama, Oklahoma, and Georgia. The results offered a fresh reminder of the president's ability to sway Republican voters as the party looks ahead to the November midterm elections.
The greatest days of Alabama are ahead of us, and the relationships we have with the president in the White House. And when I call him, he takes my calls, and we can work together with the senators, the delegation.
Right now, we want to reach out and ask all Democrats to come together and support our candidacy. We want to reach out and ask independents, let's come together and support our candidacy. We want to reach out and ask members of the other party, if you agree with us and agree that the economy is not where it's supposed to be, join us and let's do what's good for the citizens of Alabama.
Join me now with more our two top political analysts. Holly Gregory is a political anchor for Spectrum Bay News 9 in Tampa, Florida. Curtis Jackson is a political anchor for Spectrum News 1 in Columbus, Ohio. Good to see you both. Curtis, let's start with you. While Trump-backed candidates had a strong performance overall this week, were there any races that suggested limits to the president's influence within the Republican Party?
Certainly the split decision in Georgia might suggest so, but you also have to keep in mind the peculiarities of Georgia politics right now. Yes, Trump's endorsed candidate for governor, Burt Jones, lost, but Jones, who was an election denier, sort of had that weight around his neck a little bit because most Georgians do not like or appreciate the fact that the president had questioned the integrity of their elections. There's that. Jones was also facing a billionaire in Rick Jackson who had plenty of money and did use a lot of it to shore up his campaign. So you add those two things into the mix with the governor's race, and you can see that maybe some local politics had more to do with it. Taking a look at the Senate race and his pick, Mike Collins, winning that race. Collins has been in Congress, so he has a sort of establishment sort of a label attached to him while also showing intense loyalty for the president and his agenda. And you can argue that that was sort of a race to be expected. The big loser, by the way, in Georgia might be the governor, Brian Kemp, who had endorsed both Jones and also Collins's opponent, Dooley, in the Senate race. So we're seeing a indication of some possible splintering maybe in the Republican Party as we get closer to the midterms, but that remains to be seen. It's certainly remaining what it always has been for the last several years, and that's a battleground.
Yeah, Georgia, always fascinating to watch. So, Holly, let's shift to the Supreme Court now. This week, the High Court handed down a decision about whether habitual marijuana users can legally possess firearms. Walk us through this ruling and the impact that it could have on the millions of Americans living in states where marijuana is legal.
Yeah, Tim, anybody who has ever bought a gun knows exactly this federal form that you have to fill out. It's on the honor system. Yes or no, are you a drug user? I don't think anybody ever checks the yes box, and if they do, they can't buy a gun. But there is this law on the books, and the DOJ does prosecute under it. And when it specifically comes to marijuana, the DOJ prosecutes about 300 cases a year where people have a weapon and they are using marijuana. And so 300, it's not exactly rare, but it's not uncommon that people are getting caught up in this. And what the High Court decided, they handed a victory to a Texas man who was a habitual admitted marijuana user, and he had a firearm, and he challenged the law. And the justices unanimously agreed that this federal law is overbroad and that it is sweeping up marijuana users who, this is a drug that has become much more socially acceptable. Oftentimes, law enforcement is looking the other way. It is legal in many states. And the justices unanimously decided that marijuana users are getting swept up along with other people who use much more dangerous drugs. And they even cited things like, what if somebody has a weapon and is using ayahuasca, for example, and they're hallucinating, and obviously they're very actively dangerous. And the High Court just didn't think that that was just to put marijuana users in that category. So they sided with this Texas man in saying that the law is overbroad. And they had some interesting arguments. A couple of the justices even brought up the founding fathers and some of their very well-known, well-documented, love of whiskey, and that copious amounts of alcohol was drank during the time of the country's founding. And would they have thought that their weapons should be taken away for drinking, for example? And the answer to that was no. In the justices' eyes. So what this means going forward at the federal level, and so in all states, whether it's legal or not, is being a marijuana user, even a habitual one, does not mean you have to forfeit your right to own a gun, Tim.
Well, and Curtis, where you are in Ohio, the governor just signed a new firearms bill into law aimed at helping gun owners who are experiencing mental health issues. So tell us more about how lawmakers on both sides of the aisle there were able to find some common ground on this legislation.
Yeah, this is bipartisan legislation, and it sort of hits on things that a lot of people do care about, and that is keeping guns safe and storing them safely to keep them away from people who may seek to harm themselves or others. The initial reason for this law was to protect police officers and veterans who may be having some mental health struggles. And what it allows people, all people now, to do is to voluntarily store their weapons at law enforcement agencies or with firearms dealers. Now, there are a few reasons for why this has some bipartisan agreement. On the conservative side, the program is, first of all, voluntary, so you do not have to participate. It also protects participants with civil immunity, so that's something that conservatives can get behind. And of course, on the other side of the aisle, Democrats largely concerned about the prevalence of gun violence and trying to find as many ways as possible to mitigate that. And this is one way that they see as being something they can all agree on overall, which is public safety. So good bipartisan agreement, not really a surprise when you take a look at the finer details there.
All right, so Holly, let's shift gears. In Florida, there are some new questions about the future of a South Florida detention facility that's also known as Alligator Alcatraz. The Department of Homeland Security says that they moved detainees from the facility as Florida enters its hurricane season. Does it also, though, signal a permanent closure of the facility might be around the corner?
That's hard to say right now, Tim, because we can't seem to get a straight answer on this. What has happened here is for the last month, we've heard that the feds were going to wind things down at Alligator Alcatraz, this facility out in the middle of the Everglades. And then we got like a 3-sentence statement from DHS saying, because of hurricane season, this is a soft-sided facility, we've moved people out. It doesn't say if they've moved everybody out. It doesn't say if they're breaking it down, the facility. It doesn't say if they're going to move people back after hurricane season. Just one statement. So, of course, we asked the governor, and the governor said, they never told me that they were moving out. The state emergency management director here said, we've always had a plan to evacuate. Florida's very good at that if we need to evacuate them. In fact, we did a dry run when there was a wildfire in the Everglades. They had everybody loaded on the buses and ready to evacuate, and the fire switched directions. So they've always had an evacuation plan. And the governor even said, I've been told that it's not empty, but if they want to shut things down, Alligator Alcatraz was always meant to be temporary until the federal government got their deportation apparatus up and running. And if they want to shut it down, that's fine with us. So we're getting conflicting signals, and we're not exactly sure what the future is. One thing we are sure of is that the state taxpayers are still on the hook for some $600 million that got put into building this by the state, and they have not been reimbursed. So far, only $58 million has been reimbursed by the federal government. Also, environmental groups held a news conference after DHS said they were moving people out, and they said, our environmental lawsuit continues because we want this taken down. We want the damage that has been done as they see it fixed, and we don't ever want anything like this to happen in the Everglades again. So that is where things stand right at the moment with Alligator Alcatraz.
All right, Holly Gregory and Curtis Jackson, thank you. Still to come on The Big Deal, President Donald Trump returns from the G7 summit with a preliminary agreement to end the war between the U.S. and Iran. We'll take a closer look at what's in the deal when we return. We're back with the big deal. This week, President Donald Trump faced a pivotal week on the international stage. At the annual G7 summit in France, the president met with world leaders and touted a preliminary peace deal to end the war between the U.S. and Iran. President Trump signed the 14-point memorandum at the Palace of Versailles on Wednesday, kickstarting a 60-day countdown for both sides to negotiate some of those remaining sticking points. Some of the key points in the deal include an immediate ceasefire on all fronts, including in Lebanon, and the resumption of commercial shipping for the Strait of Hormuz. Iran also agreed to maintain the status quo of its nuclear program and reaffirmed that it will not develop nuclear weapons. The United States, meanwhile, has agreed not to impose any additional sanctions while talks continue. Joining me now to talk more about all of this is Dr. Bruce Jentleson, a public policy professor from Duke University. Good to see you, sir. Thanks for joining us. All right, so under this preliminary memorandum, the U.S. and Iran now have 60 days to negotiate the final agreement, although the deadline can be extended. So what are the biggest unresolved issues still on the table, and how optimistic are you that both sides can bridge those differences in just 60 days?
Yeah, they kick most of the tough issues down the road. This was supposed to be principally about Iran potentially developing nuclear weapons. They kicked that down the road to say that Iran will maintain the status quo. The status quo of the Iranian nuclear program in 2026 is much more further along than it was in 2015 when President Obama signed the deal, because President Trump got out of it in his first term in 2018 and Iran started to build up again. The June 2025 attack significantly didn't obliterate, as President Trump put it, but it did significantly hit the Iranian nuclear complex. But what you do about these nuclear weapons, that was supposed to be one of the reasons we went to war in the first place. And what's there in the agreement doesn't even give any sense of what the resolution might be. 60 days, I doubt they can conclude. I doubt they can conclude this in that period. It's too technical.
All right, so also a major part of this agreement centers on the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, which is a critical route for global oil shipments. Iran has also repeatedly demonstrated its ability to disrupt traffic through that waterway. So what does that tell us about the leverage the regime still holds, and how does it change how they might act in the future with a seemingly newfound power?
You're very right. This is a newfound power. You know, we went to war supposedly because of weapons of mass destruction. We've ended up giving the Iranians a weapon of mass disruption. This has had effects not only on us, not only on our viewers' price at the pump and farmers getting fertilizer or not getting fertilizer, paying more price, all over the world, all over the world. And, you know, Iran had never before, briefly during the 1980-88 war with Iraq, took some activities in the Gulf to try to, get it shipping. Never before had used this. And now that it's used it, I mean, even the agreement says something about that for a while they won't charge tolls for 60 days, but they weren't supposed to charge tolls in the first place. And the implication there is we may negotiate over what the terms are, but now Iran can charge tolls. And so this is one of Iran's major takeaways that never would have happened if we didn't start the war in the first place and we'd used this diplomacy instead.
Meanwhile, Israel, one of the key players watching these negotiations closely. On Thursday, Vice President J.D. Vance suggested that the Israeli government wait for the negotiations to play out. Here's what he had to say on Thursday.
Israel has the right to defend itself, but fundamentally, the Israelis, just like everybody else, have to respect this peace process that is fundamentally good for them and good for the entire region. What the president has grown frustrated sometimes is that we seem to be right on the cusp of a major breakthrough in the agreement, and then all of a sudden there's a major explosion that goes off in a civilian population center in Beirut, and a lot of people who have nothing to do with Hezbollah lose their lives. That's not acceptable.
So, Dr. Jentleson, what do you make of the comments that the vice president said on Thursday, and also the expectation that the U.S. has for Israel?
Yeah, he was basically threatening Israel. If you don't cooperate with us, we've got some things we'll do to you. It's a little bit like President Trump said to Ukrainian President Zelensky back in February 2025 that supposedly he doesn't have any cards. And the Israelis were not consulted on this. The Israelis, Prime Minister Netanyahu, for years had assumed or bet that a Republican in the White House would be better for him. And it did let him get away with a lot more than Democratic presidents did. But at the end of the day, like so many people that deal with President Trump was about what his interests are. He thinks this is going to bring down gas prices. It may or may not. And as we saw today, the signing in Geneva had to be delayed because there was more bombing. Now the Israelis say they have a ceasefire. The prospects of that lasting for 60 days are really, really slim.
All right, so beyond the agreement with Iran, President Trump spent the week meeting with allied leaders at the G7 summit. What were your biggest takeaways from those meetings, and what do they tell us about the administration's broader foreign policy priorities and the relationship with those countries?
Yeah, it's interesting. The G7 actually started in 1975 as a response to the first major oil embargo in 1973. And it was an effort by leaders of these countries to get together and coordinate energy and economic policy. So it's very significant that, 51 years later, it's happening in the context of another oil problem. The European leaders tried to play nice with President Trump, and their phrasing was very interesting. It praised him for, ending the war for the moment and helping global security and economics. That's fine because it ended it, but they've been very critical of him beginning it. And at the end, he couldn't even leave without insulting the Italian prime minister, who supposedly was the European leader who had the best relationship with him. So much so that the Italian foreign minister announced that his trip to Washington this weekend was called off. So it was very much Trump, again, doing things to allies that are both personally insulting and are antithetical to the interests of their countries.
Real quick before we let you go here, I know you're not an economist by nature, but everyone's worried about gas prices and whatnot still. The situation that we're in and what might happen over the next 60 days, does this change any of that in terms of gas prices in the global economy, do you think?
It can. I think they'll fluctuate. Every time there's a question about the ceasefire not holding, they may go up a little bit. Reserves have been drawn down. Food prices are going to go up later in the year because of the fertilizer problem now. I don't think they'll go back down to where they were. And I think Americans remember that President Trump basically said during this war that he didn't much care about their finances. It was their own problem.
Dr. Jentelson, it's good to see you, sir. Thank you for your time tonight. All right, we're not done just yet. Up next, I'm taking you along a 6,000-mile road trip across America to highlight the people and places that have shaped the nation as we approach its 250th birthday. It's coming up next on The Big Deal. You're watching The Big Deal as America prepares to celebrate its 250th birthday next month. We are traveling the country to meet the people and explore the places that have shaped our nation. As part of that effort, I traveled more than 6,000 miles through 24 states this past spring. What an experience. We visited communities and landmarks that help tell America's story. Here's a look at my journey.
Follow the rope. I'll go down first. I'll stop halfway.
Our trip starts in Hollywood with rare access to one of America's most famous signs.
And within a blink of a second, they said, the Hollywood sign is America, Jeff.
From Hollywood, we head to the Grand Canyon, El Paso, and through Texas into Fort Worth to talk Western culture and American pride. What do you think it means to be an American?
Oh my gosh. I'm gonna get teary-eyed.
From Texas, we take flight to Florida to check out tourism and gators.
Yeah, there he is. Yeah, there's a big gator right there. He likes to hang out here.
Then we get serious, acknowledging tough times in our nation's history with Martin Luther King's son. If we could bring your dad back just for today and we asked him, what do you think of America at 250? What do you think he would say?
That's a very good question.
If tomorrow all the things were gone.
Then it's on to Nashville, the story behind one of the most famous songs about America.
Without God Bless USA, my career would have been dead long ago. I gotta acknowledge that.
After a quick stop in Raleigh, we finish leg 2 with the story behind the soldiers who guard the tomb of the unknown soldier.
The ceremony that you're about to witness is the changing of the guard.
Our final leg starts at Mount Rushmore, But our story takes us to another mountain carving 17 miles away.
Yes, you could fit the whole carving of Mount Rushmore into the side of Crazy Horse's head.
From there, we head to Wisconsin for some famous cheese.
They're making 14.2 million curds today.
Chicago for baseball.
Hey, souvenirs over here, guys. Stop and shop.
And then Michigan to meet a world record teacher, 90 years young.
Do you remember what you made your first year?
$4,400.
As we inch closer to the end of our journey, we meet a first responder from the Flight 93 crash nearly 25 years after 9/11.
Don't ever forget that day.
In Philly, we catch up with the great-great-grandson of Teddy Roosevelt. And in New York, my colleague Dean Meminger takes us to Harlem.
Well, a lot of black people moved to Harlem because they wanted the American dream.
And as our trip wraps up, we stop in New Hampshire to catch up with one of the greatest documentary filmmakers of all time, the one and only Ken Burns.
To be an American is to fully engage with heart and mind and body in the process of democracy. It is not a spectator sport.
It's an adventure of a lifetime to celebrate America 250 and rediscover what it means to be an American. Come along for the ride. You can watch the full Across America at 250 special on the Spectrum News app and on our YouTube channel. Thank you all for joining us on The Big Deal. Errol Louis is back next week. Stay tuned to your local Spectrum station.